Sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries hide behind the simplest questions. When Elena Martinez pulled her vintage Rolls-Royce into Tommy Chen's struggling auto shop on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning, everyone thought she'd made a terrible mistake. The gleaming silver car looked absurdly out of place, among the rusted pickups and beat-up sedans that usually filled Tommy's cramped garage on the wrong side of Millbrook. Her chauffeur stepped out first, his crisp uniform a stark contrast to the oil-stained concrete and peeling paint that marked Tommy's world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tommy wiped his hands on a greasy rag, watching the bay door as the woman emerged from the back seat. She was perhaps 60. With perfectly styled gray hair and a navy suit that probably cost more than he made in 3 months. Everything about her screamed wealth and sophistication, from her diamond earrings to her Italian leather handbag. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to having doors opened and problems solved with a phone call. His business partner, Rodriguez, nudged him with an elbow. "What's a lady like that doing in a place like this? She must be lost." Rodriguez had been skeptical about Tommy's abilities ever since their shop started hemorrhaging money 6 months ago. 3 major clients had pulled their accounts, citing concerns about Tommy's unconventional diagnostic methods and his tendency to spend too much time on complex problems that other mechanics would declare unfixable. The woman approached the service counter where Tommy stood, her heels clicking against the concrete with military precision. Behind her, the chauffeur was opening the Rolls-Royce's hood, revealing an engine compartment that looked more like a piece of sculpture than automotive machinery. Chrome and polished aluminum gleamed despite the gray morning light filtering through the garage windows. "Mr. Chen?" Her voice carried the cultured accent of private schools and European finishing academies. "I'm Elena Martinez. I need your help with my car." She gestured toward the Rolls-Royce with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been told you're the only mechanic in the state who might be able to solve this particular problem." Tommy's confusion must have shown on his face because she continued before he could respond. "This is a 1973 Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow with a heavily modified V8 engine. The modifications were done by my late husband, who was something of an engineering genius. Unfortunately, he died before explaining exactly what he'd changed or how to maintain it properly." Rodriguez stepped forward, his tone respectful but doubtful. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we mostly work on domestic vehicles here. A car like that, you'd probably want to take it to the Rolls-Royce dealership downtown, or maybe one of those specialty European shops on the north side." Elena's smile became more genuine. "I've tried both. I've also consulted with automotive engineers at 3 universities, brought in specialists from England, and even contacted the factory where this car was originally built. Everyone tells me the same thing." She paused, studying Tommy's face carefully. "They say what my husband did is impossible. That the engine modifications shouldn't work, can't work, and that anyone claiming otherwise is either deluded or lying." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Tommy found himself drawn toward the car despite every rational instinct telling him to politely decline and recommend she try the Mercedes dealership across town. He'd built his reputation on solving problems that other mechanics gave up on, but a custom Rolls-Royce was far beyond anything he'd ever attempted. "What exactly is wrong with it?" he heard himself asking, already knowing he was making a mistake that would probably cost him time and credibility he couldn't afford to lose. "It won't start," Elena said simply. "But that's not the real problem. The real problem is that according to every expert I've consulted, it never should have started in the first place. My husband drove this car daily for 15 years, right up until the week before he died. Now, 3 months later, it's completely dead, and no one can figure out why." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. "These are copies of all the diagnostic reports, all the expert opinions, and all the failed repair attempts. 12 different mechanics and engineers have examined this engine. They've identified at least 30 modifications that violate basic principles of internal combustion. The timing shouldn't work. The fuel delivery system defies conventional logic, and the electrical configuration is supposedly impossible." Tommy accepted the folder, feeling its weight both physically and metaphorically. Inside were dozens of technical reports, photographs of engine components, and handwritten notes that read like mystery novels. Terms like theoretical impossibility and engineering anomaly appeared repeatedly, along with frustrated comments from experts who'd given up trying to understand what they were seeing. "Ma'am," Rodriguez interjected, "I think you're overestimating our capabilities here. We're good at what we do, but this sounds like it needs someone with advanced degrees and specialized training." Elena's attention remained focused on Tommy. "Actually, I think it needs someone with intuition and creativity. Someone willing to look at a problem without preconceived notions about what's possible or impossible." She gestured toward the diagnostic reports in Tommy's hands. "All these experts failed because they assumed my husband's modifications couldn't work. They spent their time trying to prove the engine was broken instead of trying to understand how it functioned." The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the metal roof with increasing urgency. Through the open bay door, Tommy could see other potential customers driving past without stopping, probably discouraged by the expensive car that seemed to claim the entire garage. Every minute Elena's Rolls-Royce occupied his workspace was costing him regular business he desperately needed. But something about the challenge intrigued him in a way he hadn't felt since automotive school 20 years earlier. The idea that an engine could function in ways that defied expert understanding appealed to the part of him that had always approached mechanical problems like puzzles waiting to be solved, rather than routine maintenance tasks to be completed quickly and profitably. "How long has it been dead?" Tommy asked, already walking toward the car to get a closer look at the engine. "Exactly 87 days, Elena replied without hesitation. "I know, because I've been counting. This car was my husband's pride and joy. He spent more time working on it than he did on any of his other projects, and, trust me, he had some very significant projects." As Tommy peered into the engine compartment, he began to understand why the experts had been baffled. The modifications were extensive and appeared to follow engineering principles he didn't recognize. Custom manifolds connected components in ways that seemed random. Electrical wiring followed paths that made no obvious sense. Fuel lines had been rerouted through what looked like additional filtration systems that served no apparent purpose. Yet everything was beautifully crafted. Every custom component showed the careful attention to detail of someone who understood both engineering theory and practical application. The modifications weren't the work of an amateur tinkerer. They represented years of careful development by someone with deep knowledge of automotive systems and access to sophisticated manufacturing capabilities. "Your husband was an engineer?" Tommy asked, studying a custom intake manifold that appeared to be made from aerospace-grade aluminum. "Among other things," Elena replied cryptically. "He held degrees in mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and applied physics. But his real expertise was in solving. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Problems that other people considered impossible. He had a gift for seeing solutions where others saw only obstacles. Rodriguez was examining the diagnostic reports with obvious skepticism. "Mrs. Martinez, according to this analysis from the university, your husband's modifications would create enough back pressure to destroy the engine within minutes of operation. The timing advance alone should have caused catastrophic detonation. And yet he drove this car 15,000 miles a year for 15 years without a single mechanical failure," Elena countered. "The engine never overheated, never knocked, never showed any signs of stress or wear. Whatever he did, it worked perfectly until the day it simply stopped." Tommy was beginning to form a hypothesis, but it was based more on intuition than technical knowledge. The modifications all seemed to serve dual purposes, creating redundancies and backup systems that weren't apparent from casual inspection. It was as if Elena's husband had engineered the engine to function at multiple levels simultaneously, with primary systems supported by secondary and tertiary backup processes. "Mrs. Martinez," Tommy said carefully, "I'm willing to take a look at this, but I need to be honest about the risks. If I start disassembling this engine and can't put it back together properly, you could end up with very expensive scrap metal. A car like this, even non-functional, is probably worth more than my entire shop." Elena's smile returned, warmer and more encouraging than before. "Mr. Chen, I didn't come here because I needed someone to play it safe. I came because I need someone willing to think differently about what's possible. Every expert I've consulted has been constrained by textbook knowledge and conventional wisdom. You're the first person who's looked at this engine and seen a puzzle instead of an impossibility." The compliment felt good, but Tommy knew it also represented enormous pressure. Elena was essentially asking him to succeed where university professors and factory-trained specialists had failed. The logical response would be to decline politely and recommend she continue seeking help from more qualified sources. Instead, he found himself nodding. "I'll need some time to study these reports and understand what we're dealing with. This isn't something I can diagnose in an afternoon." "Take all the time you need," Elena replied. "I'll have the car delivered here this afternoon, along with all the original documentation and photographs from when my husband was working on it. There are also some of his personal notes that might be helpful, though I should warn you that his handwriting was terrible and his explanations were often more theoretical than practical." The Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow arrived on a flatbed truck at exactly 2 o'clock, accompanied by 3 additional boxes of documentation that Elena's assistant helped carry into the shop's small office. Tommy spent the rest of the afternoon clearing space in the main bay, moving 2 partially completed repair jobs to the side lot and rearranging equipment to accommodate the longest, most imposing vehicle that had ever entered his workspace. Rodriguez watched the preparations with obvious anxiety. "Tommy, we've got 3 paying customers whose cars are now sitting in the rain because you're making room for a project that might take weeks to complete. Mrs. Patterson's been calling every day about her transmission, and the Johnson brothers are threatening to take their fleet business somewhere else if we don't finish their delivery truck by Friday." The concerns were valid, but Tommy had already committed himself mentally to Elena's challenge. Something about her husband's modifications had captured his imagination in a way he hadn't experienced since his early days as a mechanic, when every repair felt like an adventure into unknown mechanical territory. "We'll work around it," Tommy assured his partner, though he wasn't entirely sure how. The shop's financial situation was precarious enough without alienating existing customers for the sake of a project that might prove impossible to complete. The first box of documentation contained what appeared to be Elena's husband's original design notes, sketched on graph paper in a mixture of English and what looked like mathematical equations. The drawings were incredibly detailed, showing not just the modifications themselves, but the theoretical principles behind each change. Margin notes referenced concepts from fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, and electromagnetic theory that were far beyond Tommy's formal education. The second box held photographs documenting the modification process step by step. Elena's husband had been meticulous about recording his work, creating a visual diary of the engine's transformation from standard Rolls-Royce power plant to whatever it had become. The photograph showed components that Tommy didn't recognize, tools that seemed specifically designed for this project, and measuring instruments that belonged in a laboratory rather than a garage. The third box contained correspondence with parts suppliers, technical journals, and what appeared to be consultation notes with other engineers. Reading through the letters, Tommy began to understand that Elena's husband had been part of a network of automotive innovators who shared ideas and collaborated on experimental projects. The modifications to the Rolls-Royce were apparently just one of several vehicles he'd been developing to test theoretical improvements to internal combustion efficiency. By 6 o'clock, when Rodriguez left for the day with obvious reluctance, Tommy had spread the documentation across every available surface in the office and begun creating his own organizational system. He grouped the photographs chronologically, arranged the technical drawings by engine system, and started a notebook to track questions and observations as he studied the material. The engine modifications fell into several categories. Fuel delivery had been completely redesigned with additional injectors, custom filtration systems, and what appeared to be a secondary fuel tank hidden somewhere in the car's structure. The ignition system included multiple spark plugs per cylinder, electronic timing controls that predated modern engine management systems by decades, and backup electrical circuits that could apparently maintain operation even if primary systems failed. Most intriguingly, the cooling system had been expanded far beyond what would be necessary for a standard engine. Additional radiators, auxiliary fans, and a complex network of coolant lines suggested that Elena's husband expected his modifications to generate significantly more heat than conventional operation would produce. Yet according to Elena, the car had never shown any signs of overheating during its 15 years of operation. Tommy's phone rang as he was studying a particularly detailed drawing of the custom intake manifold system. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, Elena's cultured voice came through clearly. "Mr. Chen, I hope I'm not disturbing your analysis, but I wanted to share something that might be helpful. I spoke with my husband's former research partner this afternoon, and he mentioned that the engine modifications were designed to operate in what he called cascade mode. Apparently, the primary systems handle normal driving conditions, but additional capabilities are activated under specific circumstances." The concept of cascade operation made immediate sense when applied to what Tommy had been observing in the documentation. Each modification served multiple purposes, with backup systems ready to engage when primary systems reached certain thresholds. It was an incredibly sophisticated approach to engine management that anticipated problems and provided solutions automatically. "Mrs. Martinez, do you know what circumstances would activate these additional capabilities?" Tommy asked, making notes as they talked. "According to the research partner, my husband was working on something he called adaptive efficiency optimization. The engine was supposed to analyze driving conditions continuously and adjust its operation to maximize performance while minimizing fuel consumption and emissions. It was apparently far ahead of anything the automotive industry was developing at the time." After ending the call, Tommy continued studying the documentation until nearly midnight, gradually developing a mental picture of how Elena's husband had approached the modification project. Rather than simply improving individual components, he'd created an integrated system where each change supported and enhanced every other change. The result was an engine that functioned as a unified whole rather than a collection of separate parts. The next morning brought Rodriguez's predictable complaints about the space the Rolls-Royce was occupying and the regular customers who were being inconvenienced by Tommy's obsession with the impossible engine. But it also brought Tommy's first real insight into why the modifications had stopped working. Studying the electrical diagrams while drinking his morning coffee, Tommy noticed that several of the cascade activation circuits depended on a central control module that wasn't part of the standard Rolls-Royce electrical system. According to the documentation, this module had been custom-built by Elena's husband using components that weren't available through normal automotive suppliers. If the control module had failed, the cascade systems would revert to basic operation, but without the integration that made the modifications function properly. The engine would essentially be trying to run with half its capabilities disabled, creating the kind of conflicts and contradictions that had baffled the experts Elena had consulted previously. Tommy spent the morning locating the control module, which had been hidden behind the dashboard in a location that required removing most of the car's interior trim to access. When he finally extracted the device, he found exactly what he'd expected: a custom-built electronic unit that showed clear signs of component failure. Several capacitors had leaked, corroding nearby circuits and creating the kind of cascade electrical failure that would disable multiple systems simultaneously. The discovery should have been encouraging, but Tommy quickly realized that replacing the failed components would require electronic expertise he didn't possess and parts that might no longer be available. Elena's husband had built the control module using military specification components from the 1970s, many of which had been discontinued decades earlier. Rodriguez found Tommy staring at the failed module with obvious frustration. "So what's the verdict? Can you fix it or not?" "I know what's wrong," Tommy replied, "but fixing it is going to require help from someone with electronics experience and access to obsolete military components. This isn't the kind of repair we can handle with standard automotive tools and parts." The admission felt like defeat, but it also represented more progress than any of the previous experts had achieved. Tommy had identified the root cause of the engine's failure and understood why the modifications had worked successfully for 15 years before suddenly stopping. The question now was whether Elena would be satisfied with a diagnosis but no solution, or whether she'd be willing to support the additional effort and expense required to make the engine functional again. His phone rang before he could decide how to present his findings to Elena. The caller ID showed the same unfamiliar number from the previous evening, but this time the voice that answered was male, older, and carried a slight accent that Tommy couldn't identify. "Mr. Chen, this is Dr. Andreas Weber, Elena Martinez's late husband's research partner. She mentioned that you've been making progress with the Silver Shadow, and I wanted to offer my assistance if you're encountering any technical challenges." The offer of help felt like a lifeline, but Tommy was cautious about accepting assistance from someone he'd never met. Dr. Weber, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure what kind of help you might be able to provide. This seems to require expertise in both automotive engineering and military electronics. Actually, Mr. Chen, that's exactly what I can provide. I worked with Elena's husband for over 20 years on various projects, including the Rolls-Royce modifications. I have complete documentation of the control module design, along with sources for replacement components and the equipment necessary to test the repairs properly. Tommy felt a surge of hope mixed with suspicion. If Dr. Weber had the expertise and resources to fix the control module, why hadn't Elena mentioned him earlier? Why had she consulted with university professors and factory specialists instead of going directly to someone who'd worked on the original project? Dr. Weber, if you don't mind me asking, why didn't Mrs. Martinez contact you initially instead of bringing the car to mechanics who'd never seen anything like these modifications? There was a long pause before Dr. Weber answered, and when he spoke, his tone had become more serious. Mr. Chen, Elena's husband's work involved some technologies that were considered classified at the time. After his death, there were concerns about how much information could be shared publicly without raising questions from government agencies that prefer certain innovations to remain out of civilian hands. The implication was clear. Elena's husband had been working on automotive technologies that had military or strategic applications, and his death had triggered security concerns that affected how his innovations could be discussed or reproduced. Dr. Weber's offer of assistance came with complications that went far beyond simple mechanical repair. Mrs. Martinez brought the car to you, Dr. Weber continued, because she needed someone outside the network of researchers and engineers who'd worked with her husband. Someone who could approach the problem with fresh perspective and without preconceived notions about what was possible or advisable. Tommy realized that Elena's choice of his struggling auto shop hadn't been random or based solely on his reputation for solving difficult problems. She deliberately sought out a mechanic who wouldn't be constrained by knowledge of her husband's classified work or concerns about government oversight of advanced automotive technologies. The question now was whether Tommy was prepared to become involved in something that extended far beyond a simple engine repair into areas of innovation and secrecy that he'd never imagined encountering in his small-town garage. Tommy spent the next 3 days wrestling with a decision that felt far more consequential than any automotive repair should. Dr. Weber's offer of assistance came with implications that extended into territory Tommy had never navigated. The failed control module sat on his workbench like a puzzle piece from a picture he couldn't see, its military specification components and classified origins transforming a simple engine repair into something approaching espionage. Rodriguez had grown increasingly agitated about the Rolls-Royce occupying their main bay while paying customers waited for appointments or took their business elsewhere. The financial pressure was mounting daily, with parts suppliers demanding payment for overdue invoices and the landlord making pointed comments about next month's rent. Tommy's obsession with Elena's impossible engine was threatening the survival of the business he'd spent 15 years building. But the technical challenge had awakened something in Tommy that he'd thought was lost forever. For the first time since opening the shop, he felt like he was working on something that mattered beyond routine maintenance and predictable repairs. Elena's husband had created automotive innovations that pushed the boundaries of what internal combustion engines could achieve, and understanding those innovations felt like glimpsing the future of transportation technology. The breakthrough came accidentally while Tommy was cleaning. The control module's circuit board with electronic solvent, a section of protective coating dissolved unexpectedly, revealing additional circuitry that hadn't been visible in the original documentation. Hidden beneath the surface layer were components that appeared to serve no obvious function, connected in patterns that seemed random until Tommy realized they formed a secondary control system. Elena's husband hadn't just built one control module. He'd built 2 systems integrated into a single device, with the hidden circuitry serving as a backup that could maintain basic engine operation even if the primary system failed completely. The leaked capacitors had damaged the primary system, but the secondary circuits appeared intact and functional. Tommy called Dr. Weber immediately, describing his discovery and asking whether the secondary system could be activated independently. The conversation that followed convinced Tommy that Elena's husband had been far more sophisticated in his approach than even the extensive documentation had suggested. The secondary system was designed for what we called stealth operation, Dr. Weber explained. It maintains basic engine functionality without engaging any of the advanced features that might attract unwanted attention. Your wife's husband was very concerned about keeping his innovations hidden from competitors and government agencies that might want to suppress or weaponize his work. The revelation added another layer to the mystery surrounding Elena's husband and his automotive projects. The man had apparently been working on technologies so advanced that he'd built concealment capabilities into his own creations, ensuring they could function in degraded modes that wouldn't reveal their true capabilities to casual observation. Tommy spent the afternoon studying the secondary control circuits, gradually understanding how they interfaced with the engine's modified systems. The backup operation mode wouldn't provide the full performance enhancements that Elena's husband had achieved, but it would make the Rolls-Royce functional again, while Tommy worked on repairing or replacing the primary control system. The process of activating the secondary circuits required skills Tommy didn't possess, but Dr. Weber had provided detailed instructions along with sources for the specialized tools necessary to modify the module's programming. The work would take several days and require Tommy to learn electronic repair techniques that were far outside his normal expertise. Rodriguez discovered Tommy working late that evening with a soldering iron and a collection of electronic testing equipment that had been delivered that afternoon. The scene looked more like a computer repair shop than an automotive garage, with circuit boards and diagnostic cables spread across the workbench alongside traditional mechanical tools. "Tommy, what the hell are you doing?" Rodriguez demanded. "We've got customers calling every day asking when their cars will be ready, and you're playing electronics technician with a car that might not even be fixable." The frustration in his partner's voice was justified, but Tommy couldn't abandon the project now that he was so close to understanding how Elena's husband had achieved the impossible. The secondary control system represented a completely different approach to engine management, one that prioritized stealth and concealment over maximum performance. "Rodriguez, I think I can get this engine running by tomorrow afternoon," Tommy said, showing his partner the modified control module. "The primary system is damaged, but there's a backup that's been hidden all along. Once I get it activated, Mrs. Martinez will have her car back, and we can return to normal operations." But even as he spoke, Tommy knew that normal operations would feel inadequate after working on Elena's Rolls-Royce. The technical challenges and innovative solutions had reminded him why he'd become a mechanic in the first place, before financial pressures and routine repairs had reduced his work to a series of predictable tasks performed for customers who saw automotive service as a necessary inconvenience rather than skilled craftsmanship. The activation process proved more complex than Dr. Weber's instructions had suggested. Tommy spent the next morning making careful modifications to the control module's programming, following procedures that required precision beyond anything he'd ever attempted. Each step had to be performed in exact sequence, with specific timing intervals and measurement requirements that left no margin for error. By noon, Tommy had successfully activated the secondary control system and reinstalled the module in the Rolls-Royce. The moment of truth came when he turned the ignition key, not knowing whether his work had restored functionality or created new problems that would leave the car permanently disabled. The engine started immediately, settling into an idle that was almost silent despite the massive V8 power plant. None of the rough operation or irregular timing that had characterized the failed attempts by previous mechanics. The secondary control system was managing the modified engine components smoothly, proving that Elena's husband had indeed created something that functioned far beyond conventional automotive engineering. Tommy called Elena with the news, expecting relief and gratitude for solving a problem that had frustrated experts for months. Instead, her reaction was complicated by concerns he hadn't anticipated. "Mr. Chen, while I'm grateful that you've restored basic functionality, I need you to understand that the secondary system operates at only about 60% of the engine's design capability. My husband created those modifications to achieve specific performance goals that won't be met unless the primary control system is fully operational." The conversation revealed that Elena's expectations extended far beyond simply getting her car running again. She wanted the complete restoration of her husband's innovations, with all the advanced features and capabilities that had made the Rolls-Royce unique. The secondary system was a temporary solution that maintained the car's secret, while Tommy worked on the more complex challenge of repairing or replacing the primary control circuits. Tommy found himself agreeing to continue the project, despite Rodriguez's obvious displeasure and the mounting financial pressures affecting the shop. Something about Elena's determination to preserve her husband's work resonated with Tommy's own desire to understand and maintain innovations that pushed technological boundaries. Dr. Weber arrived the following morning with a van full of specialized equipment and several boxes of components that looked like they belonged in a military electronics laboratory rather than an automotive garage. He was a slight man in his 70s with thinning gray hair and thick glasses, but his expertise became immediately apparent as he examined Tommy's work on the control module. "Excellent work on the secondary activation," Dr. Weber said, studying the modified circuits with obvious approval. "You've demonstrated exactly the kind of intuitive understanding that Elena's husband valued in his collaborators." Most trained engineers would have followed the documentation precisely and missed the hidden backup system entirely. The compliment felt good, but Tommy was more interested in learning about the primary system repairs that would restore the engine to full functionality. Dr. Weber's equipment included testing devices that could analyze the control module's operation in ways that revealed problems invisible to conventional diagnostic procedures. The primary system failure was caused by a cascade effect that began with the leaked capacitors but spread to other components through electromagnetic interference. Dr. Weber explained as he connected diagnostic cables to the control module. Repairing it requires not just replacing the damaged parts but recalibrating the entire system to account for changes in component specifications that have occurred over the past 40 years. The recalibration process would take several days and require access to the engine while it was running under various load conditions. Tommy would need to drive the Rolls-Royce through specific test sequences, while Dr. Weber monitored the control system's performance and made adjustments to optimize the integration between modified hardware and electronic management. Rodriguez watched the preparations with barely concealed exasperation. The arrival of Dr. Weber and his laboratory equipment had transformed their automotive garage into something resembling a research facility, with cables and monitoring devices occupying workspace that customers expected to see used for conventional vehicle repairs. "Tommy, we need to talk," Rodriguez said, pulling his partner aside while Dr. Weber calibrated his testing equipment. "This has gone way beyond a simple repair job. We're running an electronics laboratory in our garage, working on a car that apparently involves classified military technology, and ignoring paying customers who keep our business afloat." The concerns were valid, but Tommy had passed the point where practical considerations could outweigh his fascination with Elena's husband's innovations. The control system represented automotive technology that was decades ahead of anything currently available, and the opportunity to understand and restore such advanced engineering felt more valuable than the routine repairs that generated their normal income. "Rodriguez, give me one more week," Tommy pleaded. "Dr. Weber says the calibration process should be complete by then, and Mrs. Martinez has already paid us more for this job than we usually make in 2 months. Once we finish this project, we'll have enough money to catch up on all our overdue bills and maybe even expand our capabilities." The financial argument was compelling, but Rodriguez remained skeptical about the broader implications of their involvement with Elena's classified automotive technology. The presence of Dr. Weber and his government-grade testing equipment suggested connections that extended far beyond civilian automotive innovation into areas where small-town mechanics might face scrutiny they weren't prepared to handle. The first day of calibration testing revealed just how sophisticated Elena's husband's modifications had been. As Tommy drove the Rolls-Royce through various performance scenarios, Dr. Weber's monitoring equipment showed that the engine was continuously analyzing driving conditions and adjusting its operation in real time. Fuel delivery, ignition timing, and cooling system operation all varied dynamically based on factors including ambient temperature, altitude, load requirements, and even driving style. "Your wife's husband created what we would now call an adaptive learning system," Dr. Weber explained during a break in the testing. "The engine doesn't just respond to current conditions. It remembers patterns and anticipates requirements based on historical data." After 15 years of operation, this engine had developed driving profiles that were specifically optimized for Elena's habits and preferences. The concept explained why simply repairing the control system wouldn't be sufficient to restore full functionality. Elena's husband had created an engine that evolved through use, developing capabilities that were unique to its specific operating history. Restoring those capabilities would require not just hardware repair, but reconstruction of the learning algorithms that had been accumulated over 15 years of daily operation. Tommy spent that evening studying printouts from Dr. Weber's diagnostic tests, trying to understand the patterns and relationships that governed the engine's adaptive behavior. The data revealed an automotive intelligence that was far more sophisticated than anything he'd imagined possible with 1970s technology. Elena arrived the next morning to observe the calibration process personally, bringing coffee and pastries that transformed the working session into something resembling a social gathering. Her presence changed the dynamic in the garage, adding an element of elegance and purpose that made the technical work feel more significant than routine automotive repair. "Mr. Chen," she said during a break in the testing, "I want you to know how much I appreciate your willingness to take on this project. My husband spent years working on these innovations, and after his death, I was afraid his work would be lost or forgotten. You've given me hope that his contributions to automotive technology might be preserved and continued." The conversation revealed that Elena's motivations extended beyond simply getting her car repaired. She saw the Rolls-Royce as a memorial to her husband's engineering genius and a demonstration that innovative thinking could solve problems that conventional approaches couldn't address. Restoring the engine to full functionality was her way of honoring his memory, while proving that his unconventional methods had produced lasting value. Tommy found himself increasingly invested in meeting Elena's expectations, not just for the technical challenge, but for the opportunity to participate in preserving something genuinely innovative. Elena's husband had approached automotive engineering with the kind of creative thinking that pushed boundaries and challenged assumptions, qualities that Tommy admired but rarely encountered in his normal work. The second day of calibration brought unexpected complications when Dr. Weber's testing equipment detected anomalies in the engine's operation that hadn't been apparent during basic functionality checks. The secondary control system was managing the modified components adequately, but some of the more sophisticated features weren't engaging properly, suggesting deeper problems than simple control module failure. "Mr. Chen, I'm afraid the damage may be more extensive than we initially realized," Dr. Weber said, studying diagnostic data that showed irregular patterns in several engine subsystems. "The control module failure appears to have triggered protective shutdowns in other components, creating a cascade effect that will require additional repairs beyond what we'd planned." The news was discouraging, but Tommy had come too far to abandon the project now. Elena's trust and Dr. Weber's expertise had brought the engine closer to full functionality than any of the previous repair attempts, and Tommy was determined to complete the restoration regardless of the additional time and effort required. Rodriguez's reaction to the expanded repair requirements was predictably negative. The prospect of additional days or weeks working on Elena's Rolls-Royce while regular customers continued to be inconvenienced pushed his patience beyond reasonable limits. "Tommy, this is insane," Rodriguez said after Dr. Weber explained the additional work that would be necessary. "We're supposed to be running an automotive repair business, not a research laboratory for experimental engine technology. Our regular customers are starting to take their business elsewhere, and we can't afford to lose any more accounts." The financial pressure was real and growing more serious daily. 3 regular customers had already moved their fleet maintenance to competitors, citing delays and lack of attention to their routine service needs. The income from Elena's project, while substantial, wouldn't compensate for the loss of ongoing business relationships that had taken years to develop. But Tommy was committed to seeing the restoration through to completion, both for the technical satisfaction and for the opportunity to understand automotive innovations that might influence future engine development. Elena's husband had created technology that was decades ahead of its time, and the chance to study and restore such advanced engineering felt more valuable than the routine repairs that generated predictable income. The breakthrough came on the 3rd day of calibration, when Dr. Weber discovered that several of the engine's subsystems had been designed with built-in diagnostic capabilities that could identify and report their own operational status. By accessing these diagnostic functions, Tommy could determine exactly which components had been affected by the control module failure and develop targeted repair strategies for each affected system. "This is remarkable," Dr. Weber said as the diagnostic data revealed the engine's internal status reporting. Elena's husband built self-monitoring capabilities into his modifications that were far ahead of anything the automotive industry would develop for another 20 years. Each subsystem can analyze its own performance and communicate problems to the central control system. The diagnostic capabilities simplified the repair process significantly, providing precise information about component conditions and system interactions that would have taken weeks to determine through conventional testing methods. Tommy could now focus his efforts on specific problems rather than working through trial and error approaches that might introduce new complications. Elena's reaction to the diagnostic discoveries was emotional in a way that surprised Tommy. Watching the engine's self-monitoring systems display her husband's engineering genius seemed to bring back memories of the man who had created such sophisticated technology in his private workshop. "He used to tell me that good engineering was invisible," Elena said, watching diagnostic data scroll across Dr. Weber's monitoring equipment. "He said the best innovations were the ones that solved problems so elegantly that people forgot the problems had ever existed. Looking at this engine, I finally understand what he meant." The diagnostic results revealed that Elena's husband had indeed created automotive technology that was decades ahead of its time, integrating features that wouldn't become standard in production vehicles until the 21st century. The self-monitoring capabilities, adaptive learning systems, and cascade backup functions represented a level of engineering sophistication that challenged conventional assumptions about what was possible with mechanical systems. Tommy spent that evening reviewing the diagnostic data and planning repair strategies for the affected subsystems. The work would require skills and knowledge that pushed the boundaries of his expertise, but Dr. Weber's guidance and Elena's support provided the confidence and resources necessary to attempt repairs that no conventional automotive technician would have considered possible. The fourth day of calibration brought the most significant discovery of the entire project, when Dr. Weber's deep system analysis revealed that Elena's husband had built additional capabilities into the engine that hadn't been documented in any of the technical materials. Hidden functions that could only be accessed through specific diagnostic procedures that Dr. Weber had developed through years of working with similar experimental technologies. "Mr. Chen, what we're seeing here goes far beyond automotive engineering," Dr. Weber said, studying data that showed the engine operating in modes that defied conventional understanding. Elena's husband was working on propulsion technologies that have applications extending into aerospace and marine engineering. This Rolls-Royce was apparently a test platform for innovations that could revolutionize multiple transportation industries. The revelation transformed Tommy's understanding of what he'd been working on. Elena's impossible engine wasn't just an automotive curiosity. It was a demonstration of propulsion technologies that could influence the development of aircraft, ships, and vehicles across multiple industries. The secrecy in classified components suddenly made perfect sense when viewed in the context of innovations that could affect national competitiveness and strategic capabilities. Elena's response to Dr. Weber's discoveries was complex, mixing pride in her husband's achievements with concern about the broader implications of his work becoming publicly known. The Rolls-Royce represented not just automotive innovation, but technologies that powerful interests might want to control or suppress. "Mr. Chen," Elena said after Dr. Weber finished explaining his analysis, "I need you to understand that what you've learned about my husband's work must remain confidential. There are people who would be very interested in acquiring these technologies, and not necessarily for purposes that align with my husband's intentions." The request for secrecy felt reasonable given the sophisticated nature of the innovations Tommy had discovered, but it also added pressure to complete the restoration properly. Elena was trusting him not just with expensive automotive repair, but with preserving technologies that her husband had developed for purposes that extended far beyond personal transportation. Tommy's commitment to completing the project had become about more than mechanical achievement or financial compensation. He was now participating in the preservation of innovations that could influence future transportation development, working to restore technologies that a brilliant engineer had created through years of dedicated research and development. The calibration process concluded successfully on the fifth day, with all of Elena's husband's modifications functioning at full capability for the first time since the control module had failed 3 months earlier. The restored engine operated with a smoothness and efficiency that impressed even Dr. Weber, who had worked with similar technologies for decades. "Mr. Chen, you've accomplished something that multiple university engineering departments and specialized automotive facilities couldn't achieve," Dr. Weber said as final diagnostic tests confirmed that all systems were operating within optimal parameters. "You've restored one of the most sophisticated automotive propulsion systems ever developed, and you've done it through intuitive understanding and creative problem-solving rather than conventional technical training." The success felt profound, but Tommy knew it also marked the end of the most intellectually stimulating work he'd ever undertaken. Returning to routine automotive repairs after experiencing Elena's husband's innovations would feel like a significant step backward professionally and personally. Elena's gratitude was evident as she prepared to drive the Rolls-Royce for the first time in 3 months. The engine responded to her inputs with a precision and smoothness that demonstrated the full restoration of her husband's modifications, validating Tommy's efforts and Dr. Weber's expertise. "Mr. Chen, you've given me back more than just a car," Elena said as she prepared to leave. "You've restored my connection to my husband's work and proven that his innovations can be understood and maintained by people who appreciate engineering excellence. I will never forget what you've accomplished here." But as Elena drove away in her perfectly restored Rolls-Royce, Tommy realized that the project's completion had created new challenges that would affect his future in ways he was only beginning to understand. The knowledge and experience he'd gained couldn't be easily applied to conventional automotive work, and the relationships he'd developed with Elena and Dr. Weber had opened doors to opportunities that extended far beyond his small-town garage. Rodriguez approached him as they watched the silver shadow disappear down the street, its silent operation and elegant presence marking it as something extraordinary in a world of ordinary vehicles. "So what happens now, Tommy? Do we go back to oil changes and brake repairs after working on technology that's apparently decades ahead of anything else on the road?" The question captured Tommy's own uncertainty about how to move forward. Elena's project had demonstrated capabilities and interests that couldn't be satisfied by routine automotive service, but it had also shown him what was possible when innovative thinking was applied to mechanical challenges that others considered impossible to solve. The answer to Rodriguez's question came sooner than either of them expected. 3 days after Elena's successful departure, a black sedan with government plates pulled into the garage, followed by a van containing 2 men in expensive suits who moved with the precision of people accustomed to getting immediate cooperation from civilians who asked no questions. The lead agent introduced himself as Director Harrison from what he described as a Federal Technology Assessment Division, though he provided no identification beyond a business card with a phone number and government seal. His manner was polite, but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who expected complete compliance with requests that weren't really requests. "Mr. Chen, we understand you've recently completed some work on a vehicle containing technologies that fall under federal oversight guidelines," Director Harrison said, examining the garage with obvious interest in the equipment Dr. Weber had left behind. "We need to discuss the nature of that work and ensure that proper protocols have been followed regarding classified innovations." Tommy felt his stomach drop as he realized that Elena's warnings about government interest in her husband's work hadn't been theoretical concerns but accurate predictions of scrutiny that would follow any successful restoration of the impossible engine. The sophisticated equipment and advanced technologies that had made the project so intellectually stimulating had apparently also triggered monitoring systems that brought unwanted official attention. Rodriguez stepped forward with the aggressive confidence of someone who dealt with government bureaucracy through his military service. "Gentlemen, this is a private automotive repair facility operating under standard commercial licenses. Unless you have a warrant or specific legal authority, we're not obligated to discuss our work with clients who value their privacy." Director Harrison's smile carried no warmth as he produced a folder containing documents that Tommy couldn't read from his position behind the service counter. "Mr. Rodriguez, the technologies involved in this situation fall under national security provisions that supersede normal privacy expectations. We're not here to create problems for your business, but we do need to understand what capabilities have been restored and who has access to information that could affect strategic interests." The conversation was heading in directions that made Tommy increasingly uncomfortable. Elena's project had been challenging and rewarding, but he'd never intended to become involved in conflicts between civilian innovation and government security concerns. The restoration work had been purely technical, focused on understanding and repairing sophisticated engineering, rather than developing new capabilities or sharing sensitive information. Dr. Weber's arrival 20 minutes later changed the dynamic completely. The elderly engineer entered the garage with the calm confidence of someone who'd navigated similar situations many times before, greeting Director Harrison by name and immediately establishing that the government agents were dealing with someone who understood their authority and limitations. "Director Harrison, I assume you're here about Elena Martinez's Rolls-Royce project," Dr. Weber said, shaking hands with the federal agent as if they were old colleagues. "I can save you considerable time by confirming that all work was performed within established guidelines and that no classified information was compromised or shared inappropriately." The familiarity between Dr. Weber and Director Harrison suggested relationships and protocols that Tommy hadn't known existed. Elena's husband's innovations were apparently part of a broader network of advanced research that operated under government oversight, with established procedures for managing civilian access to sensitive technologies. Dr. Weber, our concerns focus on the restoration of capabilities that were supposed to remain dormant until proper authorization could be obtained, Director Harrison explained. Mrs. Martinez's vehicle now contains fully functional systems that could be reverse-engineered or adapted for purposes that extend beyond personal transportation. Tommy listened to the conversation with growing understanding that Elena's impossible engine represented more than automotive innovation. The technologies her husband had developed were apparently considered strategic assets that required careful control to prevent unauthorized reproduction or adaptation by interests that might not share American security concerns. Dr. Weber's response revealed the complexity of the situation and the careful balance that had been maintained for decades between innovation and security. Director Harrison, the restoration work performed by Mr. Chen focused exclusively on returning existing systems to their original operational parameters. No new capabilities were developed, no documentation was copied or shared, and no reverse engineering activities were undertaken. The reassurance seemed to satisfy some of Director Harrison's concerns, but Tommy could see that the federal agent remained focused on understanding exactly what had been accomplished and who had gained access to information that could be considered sensitive. The successful restoration of Elena's engine had apparently demonstrated capabilities that government oversight agencies preferred to keep under careful control. Rodriguez had been following the conversation with obvious bewilderment about how their simple automotive repair business had become involved in federal security discussions. His military background helped him understand the seriousness of the situation, but it also made him more concerned about the potential consequences of their involvement with technologies that carried government oversight requirements. "Mr. Chen," Director Harrison said, turning his attention back to Tommy, "we need to understand your qualifications and intentions regarding the information you've acquired through this restoration project. The technologies involved have applications that extend far beyond automotive repair, and we need assurance that sensitive capabilities won't be shared or reproduced without proper authorization." The question felt like a test with correct answers that Tommy didn't know and consequences he couldn't predict. Elena's project had been approached as a technical challenge rather than a security issue, and he'd never considered that successful completion would bring federal scrutiny of his background and intentions. Dr. Weber intervened before Tommy could formulate a response. "Director Harrison, Mr. Chen approached this project with exactly the kind of intuitive engineering insight that Elena's husband valued in his collaborators. His work focused on understanding and restoring existing systems rather than developing new applications or sharing sensitive information. He demonstrated the highest levels of professional discretion throughout the process." The endorsement from Dr. Weber seemed to carry significant weight with Director Harrison, suggesting that the elderly engineer's opinions were respected within whatever oversight framework governed Elena's husband's innovations. Tommy felt grateful for the support but remained concerned about the long-term implications of having demonstrated capabilities that brought government attention. Elena's arrival 30 minutes later added another layer to the already complex situation. She entered the garage with the composed confidence of someone who'd expected this confrontation and prepared for it carefully, carrying a briefcase that contained documentation Tommy hadn't seen during their previous interactions. "Director Harrison, I trust you've been able to confirm that Mr. Chen's work was performed within all applicable guidelines," Elena said, greeting the federal agent with professional courtesy that suggested familiarity with similar conversations. "As you know, my husband's innovations were developed with full government oversight and remain subject to the agreements established at the time of their creation." The exchange revealed that Elena's relationship with government oversight agencies was more formal and ongoing than Tommy had realized. Her husband's work hadn't been privately developed automotive technology that later attracted government interest. It had been created with official knowledge and operated under agreements that defined how the innovations could be maintained and utilized. Director Harrison consulted documents from his briefcase before responding to Elena's statement. "Mrs. Martinez, our records indicate that restoration work was supposed to be performed exclusively by authorized personnel with appropriate clearances and oversight. Mr. Chen's involvement represents a deviation from established protocols that requires evaluation and documentation." Elena's smile carried the confidence of someone who'd anticipated this concern and prepared appropriate responses. "Director Harrison, the authorization protocols were established when my husband was alive and available to perform maintenance personally. His death created circumstances that required alternative arrangements, which were developed in consultation with Dr. Weber and approved through appropriate channels. The revelation that Elena's choice of Tommy's garage had been officially approved rather than privately decided changed his understanding of how he'd become involved in the project. The selection hadn't been random or based solely on his reputation for solving difficult problems. It had been a deliberate decision made within whatever framework governed Elena's husband's innovations. Dr. Weber produced additional documentation that seemed to satisfy Director Harrison's remaining concerns about the authorization for Tommy's involvement. The papers detailed the evaluation process that had led to selecting Tommy's garage for the restoration work and the oversight measures that had been implemented to ensure appropriate security and discretion. Mr. Chen, these documents establish your temporary authorization to work on technologies covered by federal oversight requirements, Director Harrison explained, providing Tommy with copies of agreements he'd never seen before. Your work has been excellent, but it also means you're now subject to certain ongoing obligations regarding confidentiality and appropriate use of sensitive information. The obligations felt both honoring and burdensome. Tommy had been granted access to advanced technologies that most automotive professionals would never encounter, but that access came with responsibilities that extended far beyond normal business relationships. Elena's impossible engine had transformed from a challenging repair project into a gateway to involvement with innovation networks that operated under government oversight. Rodriguez examined the documentation with obvious concern about how their small garage had become entangled in federal security frameworks. Tommy, what exactly have we gotten ourselves into? Are we supposed to be some kind of government contractors now? Elena answered before Tommy could respond. Mr. Rodriguez, your shop has been designated as an authorized maintenance facility for certain specialized vehicles that require discretion and expertise that conventional dealers can't provide. It's an opportunity that could be very beneficial for your business if you choose to pursue it. The offer represented exactly the kind of expansion opportunity that Tommy had dreamed about for years. Instead of struggling to compete with chain stores and franchise operations for routine automotive work, they could specialize in maintaining vehicles that required advanced technical skills and commanded premium compensation. But the opportunity also came with constraints and obligations that would fundamentally change the nature of their business. Working on government-overseen technologies meant operating under security protocols that would affect everything from client confidentiality to personnel hiring to equipment acquisition. Dr. Weber seemed to understand Tommy's hesitation about accepting the expanded role. Mr. Chen, the network of facilities that maintain these specialized vehicles operates very differently from conventional automotive businesses. The work is more technically challenging and financially rewarding, but it also requires commitment to discretion and excellence that not everyone is prepared to provide. Director Harrison added practical details about what authorized facility status would mean for Tommy's garage. Mr. Chen, if you accept designation as an authorized maintenance facility, you'll receive periodic work on vehicles containing advanced technologies that require specialized attention. The compensation is substantial, but the security requirements are also significant. The decision felt enormous despite being presented as a simple business opportunity. Elena's project had already demonstrated that Tommy possessed the technical skills and professional discretion necessary to work with advanced automotive technologies. Accepting authorized facility status would formalize that capability while providing access to challenging work that could sustain and expand the business. Rodriguez pulled Tommy aside for a private conversation, while Elena, Dr. Weber, and Director Harrison discussed administrative details about facility authorization procedures. Tommy, this could solve all our financial problems and give us the kind of work we've always wanted to do, but it also means we'll be working under government oversight for clients we can't discuss with anyone. The trade-offs were significant but appeared favorable when compared to the alternative of continuing to struggle with routine repairs while competing against larger operations with more resources and lower overhead. Elena's project had already shown that specialized work on advanced vehicles could be both financially rewarding and professionally satisfying. Tommy's decision was influenced by Elena's final comments about her husband's work and the network of innovators who had collaborated on developing automotive technologies that pushed engineering boundaries. Mr. Chen, my husband spent his career working with people who shared his vision of what transportation could become if engineering excellence was prioritized over mass production and profit maximization. You've demonstrated that you share that vision and possess the skills to help realize it. The appeal to engineering excellence and innovation potential resonated with Tommy's own aspirations for meaningful work that contributed to technological advancement rather than simply maintaining existing systems. Elena's husband had created automotive technology that was decades ahead of conventional development, and the opportunity to work with similar innovations felt like a chance to participate in shaping the future of transportation. Director Harrison, "I accept designation as an authorized maintenance facility," Tommy said, feeling the weight of commitment to standards and obligations he didn't fully understand but trusted Elena and Dr. Weber to explain as needed. The paperwork required to formalize the facility authorization took nearly 2 hours and included background checks, security agreements, and training requirements that would need to be completed within 60 days. Tommy was essentially becoming a government contractor specializing in maintaining vehicles that contain technologies too advanced or sensitive for conventional automotive facilities. Elena's satisfaction with the outcome was evident as she prepared to leave with Director Harrison and Dr. Weber. "Mr. Chen, you've made a decision that will benefit not just your business but the entire network of people working to advance transportation technology. My husband would have been pleased to know that his innovations helped create opportunities for engineers who share his commitment to excellence." The transformation of Tommy's struggling garage into an authorized maintenance facility for advanced vehicles happened gradually over the following weeks. New equipment arrived regularly, along with technical manuals that described systems and procedures far beyond anything Tommy had encountered during conventional automotive training. Rodriguez adapted to the changes with enthusiasm that surprised Tommy. The military precision required for authorized facility operations appealed to his background, and the technical challenges of maintaining advanced vehicles rekindled his interest in automotive technology that had been diminished by years of routine repairs. Their first official assignment came 3 weeks after facility authorization, when a modified BMW sedan arrived for what the work order described as routine maintenance on experimental propulsion systems. The vehicle appeared conventional from external observation, but opening the hood revealed innovations that rivaled Elena's Rolls-Royce in sophistication and complexity. The BMW's modifications focused on electric hybrid integration that achieved performance levels far beyond production vehicles while maintaining the appearance and operation characteristics of standard automotive technology. Tommy spent 2 days studying the technical documentation before attempting any maintenance procedures, gradually understanding how the innovations functioned and what specialized care they required. Dr. Weber visited regularly during the BMW project, providing guidance and expertise that helped Tommy develop skills for working with technologies that would eventually influence mainstream automotive development. The learning process was intensive but rewarding, building capabilities that qualified Tommy to maintain vehicles that represented the cutting edge of transportation innovation. The financial benefits of authorized facility status became apparent when Tommy received payment for the BMW maintenance. The compensation was nearly 10 times what equivalent work on conventional vehicles would generate, providing income stability that eliminated the financial pressures that had threatened the business for years. But the most significant benefit was the intellectual satisfaction of working on technologies that pushed engineering boundaries and contributed to transportation advancement. Elena's impossible engine had introduced Tommy to a level of automotive innovation that made routine repairs feel inadequate, and authorized facility status provided ongoing access to similar challenges. Rodriguez summarized the transformation during their monthly business review meeting. "Tommy, 6 months ago, we were struggling to pay rent and losing customers to chain stores. Now we're working on vehicles that won't be available to the public for another decade, making more money than we ever imagined, and learning about technologies that could change how people think about transportation." The success felt profound, but also carried obligations that extended beyond financial achievement. Tommy was now part of a network of innovators and maintainers who were responsible for preserving and advancing automotive technologies that could influence the future of transportation. Elena's trust in his capabilities had opened doors to opportunities that required excellence and discretion in equal measure. Elena's periodic visits to check on facility operations became highlights of Tommy's professional calendar. Her insights about automotive innovation and her stories about her husband's work provided context that helped Tommy understand how his role as an authorized maintainer contributed to broader goals of transportation advancement. "Mr. Chen, what you're doing here represents exactly what my husband envisioned when he developed his automotive innovations," Elena said during one of her visits. He believed that advanced technologies needed to be maintained by people who understood both engineering excellence and the responsibility that comes with access to capabilities that could shape the future. The responsibility felt significant but manageable, with the support and guidance that Elena, Dr. Weber, and the authorized facility network provided. Tommy had discovered that Elena's impossible engine was just one example of transportation technologies that existed decades ahead of public awareness, maintained by specialists who shared commitment to innovation and discretion. The garage that had once struggled to survive on routine automotive repairs had become a facility for maintaining vehicles that represented the future of transportation technology. Elena's trust in Tommy's capabilities had transformed not just his business, but his understanding of what automotive engineering could achieve when excellence and innovation were prioritized over convention and profit. Rodriguez often remarked on how their work had evolved from simple repairs to participation in transportation development that could influence how future generations would travel. Tommy, we went from changing oil and replacing brake pads to maintaining vehicles that could revolutionize how people think about automotive technology. Elena's impossible engine changed everything for us. Tommy's response always focused on the responsibility that came with access to advanced technologies and the trust that Elena, Dr. Weber, and the oversight agencies had placed in his capabilities. Rodriguez. Elena's husband created innovations that were decades ahead of their time, and now we're part of preserving and maintaining those advances until they can benefit everyone. It's more than just business success. It's contributing to transportation progress. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.